Now, as always, when we do this class, I, will often remember all of the pushback that we've gotten since the last time we did these new moon reports. And I try to answer some of the questions as some people are still struggling with the idea of when these new moons fall, when the first day of the month is, when the Sabbath days are, and, so one of the things that the Father has brought to my attention here, as I was preparing to do this class, is yet another way in order to prove that the new moon is the first day of the month. There's, some people, out there who are trying to convince us that trying to convince you that the full moon is actually the first day of the month. The thing about it, guys, the reason why they're so adamant about that is that if they can steer you off of keeping the Sabbath days, the new moon days, and the feast days, and have you worshiping our Father on the wrong day, on an unclean day, it would actually make you a lawless individual. I mean, if you read Leviticus chapter 23, you see that it is extremely important that we get his holy convocation days on the right day. And so, there are people who don't want you to keep the laws, the statutes, and the judgments. And one of the things they'll do in order to try to trick you is to convince you that the full moon is the first day of the month. It's kind of weird to think about it, but anyway, just so you're warned with a little bit more information, let me share with you over here in Genesis chapter 8 and verse 5. This, I believe, is going to prove. I always say this, but I know somebody's going to come and comment again. This should prove that the new moon is actually the first day of the month, not the full moon. But looking over here at verse 5, it says, "And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. And in the 10th month, on the first day of the month, were the tops of the mountains seen." So here it is talking about Noah's flood. This is at the end of the flood, and Noah is seeing the waters decrease off of the earth, and it's telling us the exact time in which Noah was able to see the tops of the mountains. Notice that it says on the first day of the first month. Now, this is coming out of the book of Genesis. Now, let's jump over to another book. Now, we're over here in the book of Jubilees. This is also a book written by Moses. They call it Little Genesis because, it covers almost the exact same stories that you find in Genesis, with the exception that we're given Jubilees. We're actually given the timing, as you see there in verse 31. You see where it says 1309 a.m. is telling us the exact time or the exact year from the birth of Noah in which these events took place. Um, but anyway, we're looking at verse 30 out of Jubilees chapter 5, and we see the same thing that we saw over there in Genesis with a little bit of the wording here different. It says, "And on the new moon of the first month, the earth became visible." And read the whole thing. It says, "And on the new moon of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains were seen. And on the new moon of the first month, the earth became visible." So we see right there at the beginning, it's also talking about the 10th month, like we saw over there in the book of Genesis. And it's also talking about the tops of the mountains seen. So in the 10th month, the tops of the mountains were seen. The only difference here is it's saying the new moon, right? And we know how accurate the scripture is. It is actually flawless, for us who, have faith in it. We know that there is no errors in it. And so when we see in here, it wasn't that, Moses made a mistake or he didn't know what he was talking about, or he was being fancy. He is actually telling us or making sure that we understand that the new moon is actually the first day of the month. Again, look at it right there where it says, and on the new moon of the 10th month. And then when we go back to Genesis and chapter 8 and verse 13, it says right there on where, let's see, hold on. I'm sorry, it was chapter 8 and verse 5. It says on the first day of the month where the mountains sing. So this should clear it up, but there's one other place that I want to show you guys that they offer another verse that they often reference here. Let me show you that one right quick. I probably could have showed you guys this one first. This is over in Psalms chapter 81 and verse 3. This is the verse that many of, the people who are, some of them are deceptive. They're trying to trick us. Some of them have just listened to those deceivers and are now confused. But this is, many times, this is the verse they will refer to. They don't refer to the King James Version, but they refer to other versions because it's a little bit more ambiguous. But when you look in here at verse 3 out of Psalms and 81, it's let me just read it. It says, blow up the trumpet in the new moon in the time appointed and the solemn feast. Now, the reason why they choose other translations is because it says full moon in some of the other translations. Matter of fact, let me go and find you one to show you what I'm talking about. Okay, here is one case from the New International Version. It's same verse, Psalms 81, verse 3. It says, sound the ram's horn on the new moon, and when the moon is full, on the day of our festival. And the thing about it, guys, this is those who want to change the times, they have to go to the New International Version, because if you do a search in the King James Version, never does it ever mention the phrase full moon at all. It's only in these other translations do you see full moon. But this is one they point out here. You see where it says that you're blowing the ram's horn on the new moon and on the full moon and on the festival days. And this may not be the exact translation they use. Let me see if I can find a better one. Sure, we don't want to be chasing errors, but it's part of our responsibility, when we're trying to explain something. I believe to be comprehensive is we have to know where the mistakes are made. Like, your old math teacher, she would always go in and, find where the error was made, and she would mark that off and give you partial credit or whatever. So we're looking over here. We got two other translations that use the word full moon, but you notice how they're talking about the solemn days or the solemn feast or the day of celebration. Let me get rid of one of these to make it a little bigger here. It says blow the horn on the new moon at the full moon for the day of celebration. The only reason why it's mentioning full moon here is because the mandatory feast days all fall on full moons. There are 7 feast days altogether. You have Passover, you have the memorial blowing of trumpets, you have the Day of Atonement, and there's for some reason one more that I can't think of right now. I think that's the one they call first fruits that falls right after unleavened bread. But anyway, those are 4 of the feasts, but they're not the mandatory feasts. The mandatory feasts are unleavened bread. That's a week-long feast that falls right after Passover in the spring. And then you have the Feast of Tabernacles, which is a week-long feast that falls in the fall, and then you have the Feast of Pentecost. That one falls in the third month on the 15th day of the month. All three of those fall on the 15th day of the month. All three of those festivals fall on the full moon. So that's what it's talking about here. We already pointed out how the new moon day is an important day. We are to blow our horns on the new moon day, but it's saying here to also blow the horns on those festival days, and it's pointing out how those festival days, those three mandatory days, actually fall on the full moon. It's not saying that the new moon is the full moon or the full moon is the first day of the month. It's making a connection between those mandatory, I say again, the mandatory festival days, how they actually fall on a full moon.